speak. First of all, the ADL office in Boston covers all of New England, and that includes the entire state of Rhode Island. And I'm going to sort of lay the foundation for a couple things in about 20 minutes, and then we can have a discussion. I do want to say, someone had said to me earlier that you must be very busy. And yes, the short answer, the 3 letters is yes, I am very busy, but I actually think that the issues that we're talking about tonight, this is a community discussion. When we're talking about anti-Semitism, we're talking about hatred or bigotry or racism, this is a community discussion. It's not just me or ADL that should be busy. All of us should be busy. All of us should be concerned. And recently someone had asked me, like, how are you doing? And I said that I was fired up. And I'll talk about some of the things that have been going on, even in the last 2 weeks, even in the last 24 hours, the last 7 days, there is a lot going on. Some of it is here, some of it is 30 minutes from here, some of it is 40 minutes from here, and some of it is in other parts of the country. But all of us should be really should be fired up. Okay, so this is, the ADL has, I'm going to run through a couple of slides. If you've got like an emergency question, raise your hand, but otherwise I have a short amount of time. We've been tracking anti-Semitic incidents. Incidents are different than actual hate crimes, which the FBI tracks hate crime statistics. This is the number for the United States for 2018, 1,879. This is we've been doing this since 1979. This is basically the 3rd highest number that we've ever tracked since 1991. So it's a pretty high number, and you can see I'm not going to read the slide, but you can see there's a bit of a breakdown. We tracked somewhat of a decrease, a small decrease in 2018. The record high is in 2017. And even 2017 is it's really a historic, what I would say is a historic number. So even though there's, in Massachusetts, we tracked a 19% increase in anti-Semitic incidents, it's still a really high number. But there's one very concerning, real red flag statistic that we tracked, and that is an increase in assaults against people who are Jewish across the United States. And and that's new. And that's an indicator that people are starting to not just say things, not just disseminate hatred, they're actually starting to do things in a violent way. In Massachusetts, we tracked 3 assaults against people solely because they were Jewish. And we're already starting to see indicators that this is happening, this is continuing into 2019. In 2017, the FBI statistics, the FBI hate crime statistics are only available right now for 2017. They lag tremendously. So we won't actually know the hate crime stats for 2018 until the week before Thanksgiving. But for 2017, they tracked a 37% increase in hate crimes directed against people because they were Jewish. And overall, hate crimes based upon religion went up. It's the highest level for hate crimes based upon religion since just after 9/11. I'm not going to get into all the FBI data, but racism is still the #1 type of hate crime that's committed in this country, and African Americans remain the group, the part of the population that are the greatest percentage of victims of hate crimes in this country are people of color. We have a long way to go, and the numbers are going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to show a couple of images here just to give you a sense of some of the things that are going on. On the left is a flyer. You can see the flyer says if you can see it, it says Keep America American, which sounds kind of innocuous. We have seen these flyers up all over, in every New England state. They have been on college and university campuses all over, including here. There are stickers like this up all over Boston. Below it, there's a phone number, there's a website, and it's a neo-Nazi operation. one of the things they like to do is put these flyers up, put stickers up. They take pictures, they circulate it on Twitter. And, some of it may be for recruitment purposes, but also it's getting hatred against Jews, against people of color, into the mainstream. This is clearly one of their goals. The question of whether or not it's actually a crime. Is it a crime to put a flyer out? It's probably not a hate crime to just disseminate this kind of hatred, because they're not actually saying, you should kill someone. But they are just sort of flooding the market with different forms of hatred. You can see here, this is a swastika. This happened in Arlington, Massachusetts, actually the same town that Chabad was lit on fire 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago Saturday. Some people just sort of stamped this swastika in the snow in the park. Got a lot of media attention. It's not really, and sometimes people are like, it's a hate crime. It's probably not a hate crime here. There's no real damage. But somebody wanted to make a statement, and they made their statement. And again, this is the kind of stuff that is, this was in a public park. I'm not going to read the language here, but this is at Salem State University. They had a series of pretty disgusting, vile racial incidents. This is a couple levels above, stamping in the snow a swastika. But these are messages, and one of the things that we often say, and particularly when we're working with law enforcement and training, hate crimes are messages. So they may be targeting an individual person because of their race, their religion, their sexual orientation, but the real target is that group. And so when you put a swastika in a park, it's directed against the Jewish community. This kind of language here, this message, is directed against, I would argue, people of color who go to that school or who live in the neighboring area or even across the country. But it is a message. This is the Holocaust Memorial in Boston. It was vandalized twice, about 18 months ago. And I will say just really quickly, this really, one of the things about hate crimes is they impact entire communities, right? So it's not just an individual. And this was a big, big community impact. And it did turn out that the person who was responsible, there had some mental disability issues, substance abuse, known to police. And these cases are hard to prove. And although the person was arrested, prosecuted, they couldn't sustain a hate crime charge, which is hard, it was hard for the Jewish community in Boston to understand. But sometimes when people do things in real time in the community, it doesn't always translate into a criminal conviction for a hate crime. But the impact is still very, very, very significant. So. We could talk at length about the details of this particular case, and it's actually an important case study, particularly for communities and law enforcement. But I just want you to know this is the kind of thing that really does have a profound impact, and is sometimes difficult to prove. I don't think I need to say a whole lot about Pittsburgh, which happened last October 27th. And that is, this is the most deadly attack against Jews in this country. And, if you walked in this building tonight, you saw 2 police officers, standing at the door. And they are here to protect us. And I'm guessing that in the last few months, many of you, everyone in this room has been in some place of worship, some public place where there's an armed presence now. And 5, 10, 15 years ago in this country, that was rare. If you go to Europe or you go to other countries, it's the norm, and we are definitely moving in that direction. Things are changing, and it's no longer an ideological threat. There's a physical threat that is growing and becoming more concerned, and we need to have our community and our community's institutions need to be protected. I do want to say one thing about sort of what happened in California, what happened in Pittsburgh, and what happened in New Zealand. And a lot of the people that are engaged in targeting Jews are engaged in targeting other groups. And the synagogue shooter in California, what inspired him? He was inspired by the guy who killed people at the mosque in New Zealand. And there are two different people on two different continents. One guy wrote a manifesto, and it inspired the other person because it was out online. And so I want people to keep in mind that you may live in Rhode Island, you may live across the border in Massachusetts, but what happens in this community, whether we're talking about like a little city or town or the state, everything is interrelated to what's happening in New Hampshire. I'll show you a couple of examples in New Hampshire. But what happened in New Zealand impacted Jews in the United States. And we are living in a world now where we can't just sort of consider our little community to be safe. Everything is interconnected, and I think we have to have a global view when we're looking at anti-Semitism and assessing how is our community going to respond? What are we going to do to stand up to anti-Semitism or all forms of hate and bigotry? And what do we need to do to protect ourselves? Quickly, this is just an example of an incident that happened in Arlington, Massachusetts. This was last year. It's actually right around last year. A group of students broke into the high school. It was sort of under the guise of a senior prank. They did a tremendous amount of damage. Anti-Semitic, anti-gay graffiti in the school. And I show it just because in that case, the school, law enforcement, and the DA's office actually worked to do a restorative justice approach instead of a full prosecution of the 14 students involved. And so, every incident necessitates an assessment and an analysis. And in that case, the police, the school, and the prosecutors concluded that, look, you know what? It doesn't make sense to prosecute 14 high school seniors and for them to have hate crime and civil rights violations on their records for the rest of their lives. And they consulted with us, and they worked out a process that's actually much, much more labor intensive to do a restorative justice kind of education approach to when something happens. It doesn't work, it's not appropriate in all cases. In that case, it was appropriate. But just an example of some of the things that are going out there. Super quick, this is in New Hampshire. This was a very big deal in New Hampshire where a teacher had given a assignment to a group of students. It was under, they were doing a whole lesson on the end of slavery, and he had actually given an assignment right around Christmas times for the students to come up with sort of a jingle that was related to the end of slavery and the Constitution. And a group of students sort of wrote, hard to believe, this jingle that basically praised the KKK. It was a very big deal in New Hampshire. Probably didn't make the news down here. But I show it because it is part of a pattern of how things are interrelated. And particularly when these things are happening in schools and kids are having these kind of lessons, it impacts the community. And all of the communities are, but they're all connected to one another. This was a big deal there, and actually the teacher, it's created a huge division between the community, the people of color in the community, and the white residents, because the teacher was suspended for the year, but they're actually bringing the teacher back this September to go back into the classroom. So it's a big deal over there. Just a couple of school-based incidents are probably the area where we're seeing the biggest spike. In the last week alone in Massachusetts, there were 8 school-based anti-Semitic incidents in 8 different towns. Just yesterday, there was an event at the Newburyport High School where juniors and seniors do a kind of passing of the torch for these new, the rising seniors. And students were lined up, and they recited the school's alma mater, and some students changed the words to praise Hitler in the middle of the whole thing, and allegedly did a Nazi salute. I should say that it's under investigation, so I was not there, but there was a student who actually called us and reported it at the end of the day yesterday, and it's now sort of in the news cycle. And what I would say about that is, one, it's important for schools to be transparent with parents, to investigate what's going on, but it does take courage. Courage is really, really an important factor in combating anti-Semitism and any form of hate and bigotry. And so I don't know, the student reached out to us. I don't have a personal relationship with the student or the student's family, but here's a junior who said, you know, and I mean, I could read you his text, but he basically said this was the last straw. We're not going to take this. And him and his friend were like, we're exposing this, that's it. And there's a risk, you know. If you're a 15, 16-year-old and you're going to call the newspaper and call organizations based upon something that happened in your school, you're taking a risk. And so, courage is really, really important. And I think it's something that all of us need to, we need to keep that in mind when we're dealing with anti-Semitism. This is just a flyer. It's hard to see. It was actually put on the Tufts University campus only on the Hillel building. So the Hillel building is the Jewish student life part of many, many campuses across the country. And so some people, the comic portion is a old Black Panther comic that really is meant to deploy to degrade law enforcement and the National Guard, really coming out of the 60s, but they added a bunch of language about Israel, and you can see it in there, just about the Israeli conflict. But the issue was they only put it on one building on the entire Tufts campus. They only put it on the Hillel building, and they actually put the flyers in such a way so that the flyers faced the inside of the building. So if we were in this building right now, all those flyers would be facing us so that we would see it. So it was a very well sort of orchestrated event, and clearly in our view, and we did say this, it was anti-Semitic. But this is the kind of, there are many examples of these things happening on campuses across the country and across the region. Again, this is just these kind of flyers. You can see some of this is a tweet on the left of how they go and promote themselves on Twitter, and all of those flyers were put up in Cambridge around Harvard. Super quick on this. This is a photograph of Chris Vogel, who's an African-American guy in his 20s. He lives actually not far from here because he lives south of Boston. He was a volunteer at the Boy Scouts Camp of America in Plymouth, Massachusetts last summer, Camp Squanum. And at the end of the summer, in August, they had a banquet where they sort of thanked all their volunteers. And they gave out merit badges. So, Boy Scouts give out merit badges. And there were only like 4 or 5 Black men working in this camp. It's a boys' camp, and he wasn't even getting paid. And they called him up, unbeknownst to him, and gave him the Evil Monkey Award, if you can imagine that. And he was completely humiliated, and he called us, looking for help. I want to add that there was another person in the room who was given the Nantucket Nazi Award. So, and this is a boys' camp. This is a boys' camp for boys in their teens. And we sort of worked on this in October, and I was very fired up about exposing this. And there is litigation. There's a lawsuit now that's been filed about this, and the Boston Globe did a really nice job of exposing it. But this is the kind of stuff that's going on in the community. So when kids are getting exposed to someone getting the Nantucket Nazi Award or the Evil Monkey Award, what kind of what kind of messages are those kids getting? And what kind of role models are actually running this camp? I wrote a letter to the CEO of the Boy Scouts of that geographic region, and he emailed me back saying, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We're going to conduct an investigation. But what I know from Chris is he was actually in the room. He was in the room. So I didn't alert him to anything. He was one of the participants. And there's video and pictures of the whole thing. And all these things, Rabbi Hillel will talk a little bit about this, but just so you can see the photographs of the cemetery vandalism that happened in Fall River. This was on March the 12th, so it's in the very recent past, and I'm sure Rabbi Hillel will talk about this in more detail. I was really, this was a really emotional thing to see, I have to tell you. For somebody to write "expel the Jews" on a headstone, for somebody to write "Jewish bastard," for somebody to write "kike," ethnic cleansing, the things that people wrote on these headstones, they targeted the Jewish community. There's no question in my mind that this was a targeted attack. And I was saying earlier, you may remember that there was a big cemetery vandalism outside of St. Louis last year. The vice president went. It was in the national news, big news. Every national news station covered this big cemetery vandalism. And there was nothing written, not a word was written on that cemetery vandalism in Missouri. It was just headstones turned over. The guy, they did find out who was responsible, and the individual was prosecuted, but not as a hate crime, because they had no evidence. And as it turned out, according to their investigation, the individual had a bad day, was on all sorts of substances, and this is how it came out, how he took out his frustration. But he didn't actually target the cemetery because it was a Jewish cemetery. This was clearly a targeted attack. I don't know if anyone recognizes this. These people, this is actually over by the Holocaust Memorial in Providence. This is in April. This is like in the last few weeks. And interesting, the individuals in the picture live in Fall River, Massachusetts. So, and there's nothing illegal about this, right? It's not illegal to walk around anywhere in the country wearing a brown shirt with a Nazi armband. But I would tell you that I think it's intended to be a little bit intimidating. Right? If you're going to a sacred space, this is intended to send a message. This is intended to intimidate, and it's an indication that people, some people, not the majority of people, but some people are feeling a little more empowered, a little more like, it's okay to do this. I'm going to do it. Who cares? Let me see what are you going to do to me? Not a good sign. This is just a press conference from the Chabads. You may have heard about this in Massachusetts. Chabad in Arlington, Massachusetts was set on fire on a Saturday night. And then 4 or 5 days later, someone tried to set it on fire again. This was in Arlington. And an hour after the second fire, a Chabad in Needham, Massachusetts, somebody tried to set that one on fire also. And these are, I don't know how much you know about Chabad, but like the rabbi and his family, they live at the synagogue. It's someone's house. So that's a big escalation. That's setting someone's house on fire while they're actually still inside the house. They smelled the smoke, they came out, they put the fire out, police, fire trucks, the whole. That's a major escalation. To have a house of worship and someone's house allegedly set on fire solely because it's a Jewish house of worship, or because it's a Chabad house of worship. It's pretty serious. I will say that the response has been tremendous at the community level and also at the law enforcement level. And I think it's the most senior law enforcement officials have made this a top priority, and I think that's a good thing. It doesn't matter what your political views are. When things like this happen, we expect our leaders and both at the elected level and at the law enforcement level to make this top priority. And I can, by all indications are that's exactly what's happening here, and we should all be grateful for that. I think this may be the last slide, and this is the Laconia Daily Sun. I don't know. I don't. Anybody heard this newspaper? This is in Laconia. Okay. Have you been to Laconia? Okay. So Laconia is a small town in New Hampshire. There's about 20,000 people that live there, I want to say. Have you ever lived there?
No.
Okay. So I'm very fired up about this. Okay. The Laconia Daily Sun published a letter to the editor about 3 or 4 weeks ago by a white supremacist denying that the Holocaust happened. This is some of the language that's in it. And I think that is just, when you talk about the environment that we are living in and living through, Why does a newspaper in our area give a platform? They don't have to, by the way, they don't have to publish a diatribe by white supremacists saying that the Holocaust didn't happen. They chose to do it. They think they did the right thing, and I'm in a bit of a big disagreement with them. And their response has been that they let the readers decide, and many readers did write letters. We took issue with that, and just yesterday I had a big call with the owners of the newspaper. We haven't come to any sort of agreement. What I said to them are we now at a point when you're providing a platform for people to have a discussion in a newspaper about whether the Holocaust did or did not happen? Is that where we're going? Because a newspaper, whether it's in Providence or in Pawtucket or anywhere, they don't have to publish a letter from a white supremacist denying that the Holocaust happened. And by the way, Facebook doesn't have to allow Holocaust denial on their platforms either. They choose to do it. And I think that a lot of these things are contributing environmental factors that contribute to people wanting to walk around the Holocaust Memorial dressed up as Nazis, to intimidate us. On Saturday night in Peabody, Massachusetts, where it's just north of Boston, Peabody Essex Museum, great museum if you've ever been there, there's a rabbi who was walking to shul wearing a kippah. A pickup truck pulled up, and they started screaming effing Jew to them. This is just on Saturday. And so, the question is, what's next? The next time, does the pickup truck stop? And maybe the person gets out of the truck, maybe the person has a bat, maybe the person has a gun. There is an escalation that is brewing here. And so that's why I started with saying that this is a community conversation. And these kind of acts, these kinds of crimes, they are community hate incidents, and they are community hate crimes. They are directed at all of us. And it doesn't matter if it happened in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, or in Pittsburgh. And so I would say that it needs to draw all of our attention and all of our focus. So I'm guessing I'm out of time. Yes? Or no?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to